in clinical trials, et cetera. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes.
No doubt.
All right. Senator Cassidy.
I will defer to Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member. Thank you all for your testimony here today. Dr. Harkins, I want to ask a question related to those who are struggling with long COVID in rural areas. As you know, my state is pretty rural. In addition to extraordinarily rural, we are also home to over half of our country's federally recognized tribes. We got about 80% of our communities that are not on a road system, so access to care is always a challenge. But you had raised that recent CDC data marks more than 5,000 deaths from long COVID, and while long COVID death rates varied by race and ethnicity, they were the highest among American Indians and Alaska Natives. So I'd ask if you are aware of any research efforts that have been focused specifically on American Indians, Alaska Native population. And I appreciate that it may be that the challenge has just been that access to that care, whether for diagnosis, for any level of ongoing care, may have challenged it. But if you can speak to any research efforts that you're aware of, and then what your recommendations for ensuring that just more of the marginalized population, specifically in our rural communities, receive the diagnosis and then the follow-on treatment with regards to long COVID.
Yes, thank you for your question. In New Mexico also, very rural state with a large population of Native American as well. We don't have a very specific trial or focus just on our American Indian, Native, and Native Alaskan population. And I think historically, maybe we have not done well with research on this population. I think building a better partnership with our indigenous tribes and other tribal communities to want to help and share and listen to their input as to what is needed for clinical trials and other things in their community. I think they have to drive miles and miles and miles to come to a center, or they can't drive at all, or they don't have money for gas. Exactly. There's also the distrust of the research system, and I think coming to them, going to their communities in a partnership, and maybe talking with them or getting the other folks to, at least listening and understanding what is needed and how can we encourage their participation.
So let me ask about the opportunities through telehealth. You had highlighted HRSA's Telehealth Technology-Enabled Learning Program initiative to help train local providers to identify patients with long COVID and then to work with the coordination. In Alaska, clearly our community health centers are a critical component of our healthcare system. They really played a very key role in addressing the COVID pandemic. Can you share any examples of how Recover grantees can use technologies in perhaps newer, different ways to advance best practices, but really to allow for increased access to these clinical services, again, through partnerships, because the distances aren't going to get any closer. If you don't have roads, to your point, the ability to fly is cost prohibitive. So we're talking about ongoing access and other partnerships through perhaps telehealth and others in our community health centers.
Sure. Through our Project ECHO program, we reach many providers and trying to educate them, but I think also we need to have access for patients to actually visit with physicians in a multidisciplinary COVID clinic. that's going to take a lot of other work to do, but I think having education, broadband technology also is an issue, getting that to the patient homes. But I think setting up regional centers where potentially the primary care provider that is in that community can be a partner in the learning loops, and then being able to understand the diagnosis and then take that to their patient. So I think that telehealth is really going to be the answer for educating the providers that can then bring the treatments and recommendations to their patients in their communities that are very rural, so that the provider is the treater and the patients don't have to come to the bigger academic center.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for coming here this morning, for sharing your stories, speaking about the different journeys that each of you have had or your families have had as you have dealt with long COVID. I want to follow on to what Senator Kane has been talking about, which is being believed. You have gone through an experience that has impacted you clearly physically. You've shared that. But we're living in a time and a place when everybody questions the reality of the facts on the grounds, whether it's politics or COVID or just so many different things. And that's hard. That's hard on the mental health as well. And so I would ask each of you if you can speak to the challenges that you may have had with regards to access to mental health care, behavioral health, because I have to assume that as you have been dealing with the physical effects of this, when you feel like you are being challenged by others, it's not real. You'll get over it. You are making it more than it really is. That has to be very stressful. That has to lead to higher anxiety. And that can lead to real depression. So if I can ask the three of you to share any thoughts that you may have on mental health and behavioral health access. We'll begin with you, Ms. Vasquez.
Yes, thank you. A large part of my out-of-pocket expenses have been for therapy, for mental health care. I was not, even in Los Angeles, was not able to find a mental health provider who was in network, who would see me regularly, and who didn't require me to drive an hour in traffic. So that's a big part of my expenses. I will say also, I have a history of PTSD and trauma before getting sick. And honestly, I think having depression in my health record contributed to the medical gaslighting that I experienced. I got a lot of, well, the mind has, really important impacts on the body. Well, the body has a lot of impact on the mind. So I think there's a social emotional piece to, my depression and my mood symptoms. And quite honestly, this is a neuroimmune condition, and brain inflammation has been shown to be linked to many mental illnesses and mood disorders. And so I 100% believe that as I get better care for my long COVID and ME/CFS, my mood will improve because my brain won't be as inflamed.
Ms. Beal.
Thank you. For me, for that access part of your question, the challenge for me has been getting an appointment with a neurologist. So I had a neuropsychological evaluation done, and it took me 9 months just to get that appointment. And in that appointment, you go through the different mental health diagnoses, and having depression that I didn't have before I was sick, and trying to figure out what caused the depression. Well, in my case, it's the long COVID. it's had that effect on me. I have insomnia, anxiety, all of that started when I got, COVID and then long COVID. So that's been challenging. Like what you said, what the doctors are saying to you is the same for me. You need to walk more. You need to be in the sun. You need vitamin D, all of those things. That'll make you feel better mentally. And that might help, yes, but the long COVID is causing the anxiety and depression. So if I'm not treating the long COVID as it needs to be treated, then the depression and anxiety are going to continue.
Ms. Heim, do you have anything to add?
I think one of the things that has been hard for me with my daughter is that she kind of tells herself, well, I just need to work harder. I just need to study more. I just need to do this or that, and things are going to get better. And the fact is that's not true. One of the doctors we work with works with athletes, and they are studying it. And the more we push, the worse it gets. And that's very counterintuitive. But with this thing, we have to figure out a way to treat it without pushing, because what happens is you push harder, it gets worse, then you feel worse, and it's like this rapid cycle that just goes. And so they have to find a way. When she was doing physical therapy, they did go very slow on the recommendation of that pulmonologist that had the information. So again, it's about them getting the information so we can treat it properly and not create this cycle of depression and anxiety and, push and then get worse and.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Senator Smith?
I think well, I don't think Senator Smith would ever defer to me in anything other than allowing me to speak first, because I have to go do a press conference and then get back here. But I want to echo the appreciation for all of you to.
Mr. President, I am here today for a really fun update. And some of you have been here before when I've had occasion to speak about the last great race. The last great race in Alaska is really all about the Iditarod. I note the presence of my friend from Vermont who was sitting where the presiding officer is last year, and he was so captivated by the story of the Iditarod. He said, Lisa, when you come back and you give the great announcement, let me know. And so I'm pleased to be able to regale you with yet another Iditarod. This is an extraordinary tradition, 51 years in Alaska, where dogs and mushers have left the starting in the Willow Wasilla area to head north on an almost 1,000-mile, on some years an over 1,000-mile race, a test of musher and canine against all of the elements. And it's always a bit exciting, but this year I'm really excited to be able to announce that we have made history yet again with the Iditarod sled dog race. Dallas CV has won for the 6th time in a row. This is the first time any musher has ever won more than 5 Iditarods. So this extraordinary young man from an extraordinary mushing family has made history in a way that is absolutely worth celebrating. Again, for those who are not familiar with the Iditarod, it's about a 1,000-mile sled dog race. It goes from the Anchorage area where we host the ceremonial start. I was there a couple weeks ago. And then they begin their actual race the following day on Sunday. But they proceed all the way up to Nome. This is not easy terrain. You are going over mountains. You are going over ice on the ocean. You are going over rivers. It's the terrain is challenging, and certainly the temperatures are challenging. And this year has been a test for all of our mushers. In certain parts of the trail, they were seeing temperatures down in the negative 40 degrees. You get yourself moving behind a dog team, you get that wind in your face. It is no pleasant journey by any stretch of the imagination. It is tough. It tests the mushers, it tests the canine athletes, but it is an extraordinary race that was based off of a relay effort to get diphtheria serum to Nome during an outbreak in the 20s. We no longer carry the diphtheria serum, but we carry strong messages about, again, the role of working dogs, the role that mushers and their teams have had in a state like Alaska. I want to speak a little bit about the CV family, because as we're celebrating and recognizing Dallas's extraordinary achievements, having won now 6 Iditarods, it's important to know that he comes to this race with the Iditarod literally in his veins. The family tradition started back in 1973. This was the very first Iditarod, and Dallas's grandfather participated in that race. Dan CV ran the very first Iditarod. He ended up placing 3rd, so pretty respectable, absolutely, but he stayed with it. He stayed with the Iditarod, and he raced in 4 additional Iditarod races. Then Dan's son, Mitch CV, took the reins from his dad. He started his own racing kennel, and Mitch went on to win 3 Iditarods himself. He raced in a total of 28 different Iditarods. That's a lot of racing. That's a commitment to the race. Mitch had 4 sons, 3 of which have taken on the Iditarod themselves. The oldest was Danny CV. He raced 3 times in the Iditarod. Tyrell CV, he's raced twice. And then, of course, Dallas, who has competed in a total of 14 Iditarods. I think it's also worth noting that Dallas's wife, Jen, has also herself competed in the Iditarod. So this is a family, again, that is extraordinarily committed and dedicated to dog racing, and particularly with the Iditarod. I think it is somewhat unique to note that it was just a couple years ago that Dallas and Mitch, his dad, were competing in the same race. How many different sports activities, competitions, intense competitions, do you see a father and a son as competitors? So it's really quite remarkable how the CVs came to this race and how they have committed to it. So when Dallas started racing in the Iditarod, he was the youngest competitor when he entered the race. It was just 2 weeks before his 18th birthday. So he started pretty young and has stayed in it since 2005. At 25, he became the youngest competitor to win the Iditarod. He also holds the record for the fastest Iditarod ran. This was set back in 2021. In that race, the fastest race ever, he completed that race in 7 days, 14 hours, and 51 seconds. 7 days to race 1,000 miles. And so now, with this 6th win, he has overtaken another 5-time champion, Rick Swenson, for the most Iditarod championships of all. Dallas is going to be inducted into the Alaska Sports Hall of Fame this year, which again is certainly appropriate given all of his accomplishments. But one of the things that's so great about the Iditarod, one of the things that's so great about these mushers, is they will tell you, it is not about me. I'm the individual that's standing on the sled. I'm making sure that they're getting the water, the food, the rest that they need. But this is about the mushers. This is about the canine athletes. And Dallas gives due credit to the lead dogs that got him through the race, Arrow, Sebastian, and occasionally one of his older dogs, Prophet. He kind of joked. He says, just about every dog on my team could be that leader except one. Frank, apparently, is the name of the one. He says, not that he won't do it. Dallas says, he'll run right up there. I just don't trust him. He'd rather pee on things. That's Frank. He runs in the back. So we all have, different challenges with friends and people that we work with, and sometimes the people that we work with are not people, but they are dogs. Frank is exactly in the place that he needs to be. So there are there's never an Iditarod where there isn't a story that captivates the news. And the weather was significant. I mentioned the 45 below. You come to a place on the ocean when they're going across ice, and there's an area where it's so windy they call it the blowhole. And the accounts of several of the mushers not being able to see their hands in front of their face, much less the dogs in front of them. The markers on the trail are gone. The winds are so intense that it blows the sleds and the mushers off the trail. This is not easy stuff. That's towards the later end of the trail. One of the incidents that got everyone's attention, just about the first 100 miles. So our champion, Dallas Seavey, is coming down the trail, and there's a blind spot, a blind corner that he comes around, and right there in front of him in the middle of the trail is a moose. Moose and sled dogs and teams do not get along well. The moose are ornery and cranky. The dogs are looking at him and barking at the moose. It's not a good combo. Dallas knows that this is not good. But the moose kind of gives the first half of the team, he's got 16 dogs in harness. The moose kind of gives the first half of the team the go-ahead, but then turns around and starts charging the latter half of his team. We've had dogs that have been severely injured and have died on the trail because of moose attacks. They're just ferocious, cranky, particularly this time of year when the snow has been so deep and it's just hard for the moose to walk. So Dallas does what he needed to do. He dispatches the moose. He has a revolver. He takes it out of the sled. There are actually rules of the Iditarod that tell you what you have to do if you encounter an animal that you need to take out that is threatening yourself or your team. And the rules require that if it's an edible animal, you have to gut it properly and notify the authorities at the next checkpoint. Well, remember, this guy has won 5 Iditarods. He wants to win the 6th. He's got a mission, and gutting a moose was not necessarily part of his travel plan. But he gets out his knife and he guts the moose. In his own words, he doesn't do the best job that he could, but he does an acceptable job. He then moves on. Now keep in mind, he's one man with 16 dogs that are in a bit of a tizzy because you've got a moose on the trail, you've heard a gun, you now have blood, they're in the middle of a race, they want to go. Dallas Seavey is not going to be able to haul that moose off the trail. So he leaves the moose on the trail, goes back to the checkpoint ahead, or goes up to the checkpoint ahead and notifies them that there's a moose on the trail. 3 mushers come behind, same blind corner, come around the corner, the dogs see this thing in the trail, leap over it like horses going over a jump. The sled's flying, the stories of the mushers about it being almost surreal to be using this moose like a speed bump. Anyway, the story ends that the moose was taken to the village and shared with the villagers, so there was good use to the moose. But it is one of those things that you think about, wow, only in Alaska. What has not been shared as much as the dispatch of the moose, however, was the very first musher to come around that same blind corner, see the moose in the trail. He was able to stop his team quick enough. Jesse Holmes, Jesse sees the moose, he needs to get the moose off the trail. He punches the moose in the nose. Now, I don't know whether that's bravado. I don't know whether the moose just looked like he needed a punch in the nose. But anyway, Jesse was able to move past the moose safely with his team. So these are some of the things that make the stories interesting, amazing. A lot of people swear like that's the craziest thing ever. Why would you do it? I think it is important to note that Dallas not only won in 9 days, 2 hours, 16 minutes, and 8 seconds. He did so. He finished ahead of Matt Hall, who came in 9 days, 6 hours, 57 minutes. So Dallas was 4 hours plus ahead. And he did that with a 2-hour penalty that he received from the Iditarod for not properly gutting the moose. So the CV stories continue. But Dallas's time, again, think about it. Think about it, my friends. We do some things around here where we say this is a long slog. When you are standing behind a sled, when you are running next to your team, when you are guiding them through not only extreme bitter temperatures, but howling winds, to be on your feet for about 9 days, 2 hours, 16 minutes, and 8 seconds. Dallas finished with a total of 10 dogs in harness. Their average speed was 4.42 miles. So they're clipping along, but it is a tough endeavor. There's some stories from other mushers that you hear. A rookie musher, Josie Thayer, she's still on the trail right now, but she was having trouble staying awake going across the frozen Yukon, and so she switched her sled up to a version where she could kind of sit down. She's on the flat of the river, and you're literally falling asleep behind your dogs. That's trust. That's trust, when you know your animals can take you, guide you while you get a few minutes cat nap. But it's tough when you're doing that. So I mentioned Josie as a woman there. I think another history-making fact for this year's Iditarod is that 4 women finished in the top 10 of the Iditarod. This is the most ever women in the race's history to finish in the top 10. So we had Paige Drobny, who came in 4th, Millie Porsild, who finished 7th, Amanda Otto, 8th, and Jessie Royer, who finished 10th. The top 20 for the Iditarod has 7 women this year. So a lot of times you think in order to do this extreme sport, in order to handle a dozen dogs, in order to take all of this on, you have to be some tough, burly guy. Women are doing an extraordinary and exceptional job. One of my dear friends and a longtime musher, Dee Dee Johnrow, mushed 33 separate Iditarods. Dee Dee is about 5'2" and maybe 100 pounds, blonde hair and blue eyes, great, beautiful woman, 70 years old, and she didn't mush the Iditarod this year, but she did the snow machine trail all the way up. So just go out for a 1,000-mile snow machine ride. Tough women, let me tell you. There were 16 rookies in the race this year. 4 of those rookies have dropped out, 2 have finished, 10 are still racing. So right now, as we speak, there's 11 mushers still out on the trail, and 7 mushers total have dropped out. 20 mushers have finished the race so far. So it's an extraordinary endeavor. As the rest of the teams finish up, we're praying for their safety, and I'm sure they're praying for a little bit of a nap when they come in. But it's congratulations and commendations to everybody who participates in this. There are no losers. They are all winners, from the mushers to the dogs to the amazing volunteers. Very few paid staff, but the volunteers that come, whether it's to put on the banquets, whether it's to be dog handlers, whether it is to help make sure that there is straw for teams in certain locations. The Iditarod Air Force, which is an all-volunteer Air Force that helps move everything along the way. The veterinarians that come from all around the country to volunteer a week of their time to make sure that the dog's care is taken care of. Those in the communities who come out, who sponsor gourmet meals for the first place person to come into Cripple, or in Unalakleet, the pizza place, it's called Peace on Earth, where if I want to make sure that a particular musher gets a nice hot pizza when they come into Unalakleet, I can call up, they'll write a nice message on the box and give it to the musher when they come in. So it's everybody coming together to make this extraordinary event possible. Nothing better captures the grit, the determination, the ruggedness, the perseverance, the spirit, or just the sheer audacity of Alaskans. So I'm delighted to be able to come and celebrate Dallas CV and the Iditarod once again. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Attorney General, welcome. Good to see you again. Thank you for the trip last summer where you had an opportunity to kind of get a little summary on the ground of some of the law enforcement, public safety issues that we face primarily in rural Alaska. I appreciated that Chair Murray had highlighted murdered, missing Indigenous persons. The work that your teams are doing, working with us in Alaska, is very, very important. Also appreciate the keen focus here in this committee and the subcommittee on fentanyl. I wish that I could say we're far enough away that we have escaped, but our smallest of the small rural villages are being targeted because you can sell this poison there for 10 times more in a village like Quinnahock or Togiak than you can in even Anchorage. So we all need to keep leaning in on that. Back to the issue of tribal justice. When you were there, we had good conversations. I think that was very important. We've seen some measurable progress on cross-deputization agreements between the state of Alaska and tribes relating to law enforcement. We've got the Not Invisible Commission report recommendations that are giving us a little bit of a template here. But I am a little concerned in terms of the follow-on from your visits insofar as what more we can do to address the public safety issues. We've asked for some updates. We haven't gotten a lot, and I don't want to be in a situation where these villages, whether it's Galena or Huslia or really any place, feel that you came, you saw, and then there hasn't been the follow-on. We've got a lot of work I think we know that we need to do to implement VAWA 2022 and the Alaska Public Safety Pilot. So I would ask that you and your team can provide us with recommendations for improving the funding opportunities for our Alaska Native communities in the short term here. If we can do this within the next 30 days, that would be great if you have legislative proposals. But we want to keep the momentum going. I know that you committed to me. Your teams are working on that. But if there are legislative proposals, again, we want to try to put some of these in the pipeline.
Well, we're very happy to do that. I will say that it was a real eye-opening experience for me, as you told me it would be, to be on the ground there and to see the difficulty of transportation between one village and another, and the difficulty law enforcement has of reaching a village, and the really inexcusable fact that there really isn't sufficient law enforcement in any of the villages. I can give just one update. I would say as a result of my visit, I've been pressing for money for special tribal jurisdiction. And this budget request includes a plus $14 million from FY24 for special tribal criminal jurisdiction. And I would say it's a consequence of what I saw in Alaska.
Well, let's commit to working through some of these specifics going forward. One of the other things that I have heard is as our tribes are looking for federal financial assistance, not only in the public safety space but in others, they have been directed to entities for technical assistance, but it's technical assistance that is from the lower 48. Perhaps maybe not culturally responsive or geographically relevant to many of the issues that we experience there. So, I appreciate what the department is doing to try to help bolster the capacity of tribes and tribal organizations as they're looking to gain access to some of these grant opportunities. But it's something that I'd like your folks to look at, because this is this again is a big challenge. If you're talking to somebody who has no idea that we don't have, for instance, reservations in Alaska, and the construct of the governance just makes it that much more challenging. So I raise that to you. I want to comment very quickly on what Chair Murray had raised about the Crime Victims Fund. You outlined the benefits of it, but I will tell you, I am very, very concerned that we're going to be in a situation where if additional fines, fees, penalties from other sources aren't redirected to address the shortfalls, so many of these organizations that just are working so hard, they're burning out, they can't deal with this year-to-year challenge because they simply don't have the resources. And it's not only in the Crime Victims Fund, it's the impact that we're seeing with our child advocacy centers. Many of our COCs have been using additional funding for their base operational costs in addition to VOCA cuts. So you've got VOCA funds that are being cut, you've got the CACs that are hanging out there. It is really a tenuous situation. I know you know that, but we really need to have identified some kind of an offset for this $7.3 billion that's proposed to replenish the crime.
There is a proposal. If I have time to respond now, I will. I totally agree with you. This trying to depend on the amount of money we're able to get in any particular year is always going to be uncertain. The administration's proposal in the budget, I don't think there's legislative text yet, would take effect in 2026, provide $7.3 billion in mandatory appropriations over 5 years to replenish and stabilize the fund. I think that's better than the way we're doing it now, year to year. And so our staff would be happy to speak with the staff of the subcommittee and your own staff as well on this proposal.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski. I understand, General Garland, that you're okay to keep going.
Sure.
We don't need a break, so let me ask Senator Peters to go next.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Attorney General Garland.
Senator from Alaska.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this was supposed to be a really great week for us in Alaska. We had an opportunity to kick off the Alaska Resources Day back here in Washington, D.C. The leaders of 10 of my home state's trade associations, notably all women, which I think is worth commenting on, they all flew back to Washington, D.C. for Resources Day, and they and other industry leaders gathered to really celebrate the success of the industries that are present in our state. Everything from oil and gas to mining to seafood, tourism, and it was a good day spent educating folks about Alaska's commitment to, and really our record, a very strong record of responsible development to benefit Alaska and to the nation. And it should have been a really great opportunity to reflect on how far we have come as a state. But instead of being able to focus on that, the big buzz was the reminder that we are really at the mercy of an administration that views us, views Alaska's resources as really nothing more than a political pawn in a re-election campaign. The rumors are out there, and there's more substance to them now than there were a few days ago, but the Biden administration is set to announce yet 2 more decisions to restrict and prohibit resource development in the state of Alaska. This is almost getting to be so routine that we're coming to dread Fridays in the state of Alaska, because that seems to be the day that the administration reserves to just dump more closures, more lockups, more shutdowns on us, on top of the dozens and dozens of initiatives that have already been imposed on us over these past 3 years. Unfortunately, the decisions that are going to be unveiled tomorrow are probably some of the worst that we've seen from the administration, an administration that I think has just lost their way when it comes to energy and mineral security. There was a 1980 law under ANILCA, part of the balance that we struck on conservation. This was the big deal in 1980, but it was an effort to, why is the district important in the first place? It was important back then in the 1980s, but even more so important now because of the critical minerals that this country needs to break our dependence on China and other foreign nations. This project is not new. This project was fully approved, and I think it's worth underscoring that, fully approved in 2020. But this administration says, never mind all that. Interior sought a voluntary court remand for Ambler's approval on the very same day that President Biden held a roundtable to discuss what? To discuss the importance of critical minerals and how this country needed critical minerals. He's saying that on one screen, and on the other screen, you've got a remand, effectively, putting the brakes on the Ambler project. And for the past couple years now, Interior has magnified the impacts of this simple private haul road so that they could really find a way to just turn the tables, to turn this project from one that had been approved to one that will be rejected. The second action that we are anticipating from Interior tomorrow will be the finalization, the final rule, to shut down further access to our National Petroleum Reserve in the northwest portion of the state. This is a 23 million acre expanse. This is an area about the size of Indiana. There's only a few hundred acres of this Indiana-sized piece of the state that have ever been approved for any type of development. And it's exactly what the Obama-Biden administration had pointed to. They said to the oil and gas companies, go there, go to the National Petroleum Reserve, Alaska. Don't go to ANWR, go over here, develop there. So now you have the interest in it. And after approving exactly one significant project in our petroleum reserve, the Biden administration has now completely abandoned that approach. And what we expect to see tomorrow is Interior issuing just a sweeping rule to now cut off access. And to add insult to injury, without barely consulting the Alaska Natives who live on the North Slope, failed to consult, failed to violate their own policy. They didn't fail to violate, they violated their own policies. They ignored federal law. This is really tough for us in Alaska because this is not the first time now that this administration has just turned their eye to what the law requires. They ignored federal law, which requires an expeditious program of competitive leasing and development. So where there was once opportunity, they're now creating uncertainty and restrictions that will cut off access and halt future projects. But again, never mind all that, the administration says, because it just doesn't seem to matter to them. And that's what I don't get. Not the rule of law, not the local people who support responsible development, not the state benefits or the national need, not even the international events and the crises that we're dealing with right now at this moment that should have prompted a gut check. And maybe folks within the White House saying maybe we should dial this back just a bit right now, given what is happening in the world. But none of that seems to matter, as once again, this administration makes two more politically motivated decisions against responsible resource development in Alaska. And we need to be clear here. These were not fair processes. These were fait accompli, decided behind closed doors, likely in concert with the national environmental groups, well before the administration publicly announced that it was even considering them. So here we are. Here we are under the administration. There hasn't been and there won't be any new leasing in our petroleum reserve. There aren't any more project approvals in sight to help supply West Coast refineries that have now turned to imports from abroad. And where are they looking for those imports? Previously from countries like Russia, but now at the direct expense of the Amazon rainforest, which the environmental community calls the lungs of our planet. But that's where California, believe it or not, is going to be looking to import. And nor will we be able to build the private restricted use Ambler Road that federal law explicitly allows for, that we need to access minerals that are crucial to our security, to our economy, and to the success of this administration's own policies. And I think, Mr. President, this is all because it's a political year. It's a political year, and this administration is putting partisan payoffs ahead of sound policy, and that is regrettable. It is mightily regrettable. Now, setting aside Alaska Resources Day, think about what these decisions say about the administration's priorities and the signals that they send to our adversaries. Because I think sometimes we just look at these and we think about them in the context of what people in our own country are saying. But what is the message that is being sent to our adversaries? We know, and they know, that we are deeply dependent on foreign minerals. This is our nation's Achilles heel. I keep talking about it, especially as China dominates so many global supply chains. We imported at least 50% of our supply of 49 different mineral commodities last year, including 100% of 15 of them. And that has risen quite dramatically over the past couple of decades. And for many crucial commodities, it's still going up. And so why does the Ambler District matter? It matters because it has copper. Our top experts warn that copper is on the verge of a global shortage. It has cobalt, which we imported 67% of our supply last year, including from African nations where malnourished children are the ones who dig it out by hand. We can't feel good about that. The Ambler District has resources like gallium and germanium, which China, in an effort to show who's boss here, recently cut its exports of. This was a clear shot across the bow to the west. About the only thing that Ambler doesn't have is access to a road, which it needs to facilitate the mining, which we need to facilitate everything from advanced munitions to electric vehicles. So let me assure you, we should want to mine in Ambler where it will happen safely under the highest environmental standards in the world, and we should stop outsourcing mineral mining abroad, particularly to these jurisdictions where there are no or very little environmental protections, and we see horrific human rights abuses among workers. The administration's NPRA decision, that's our petroleum reserve. We shouldn't just talk in these acronyms. NPRA means National Petroleum Reserve Alaska. This decision is just as reckless. The Middle East is on the verge of a regional war thanks to Iran. And the one thing standing between us and $200 a barrel oil is American producers who operate on state and private land, and yet the president criticizes them. He criticizes them instead of thanking them for saving his administration. That's what's helping to keep a lid on some of these prices. You know, it's one thing to conjure up a villain, it's another to let the real villain, which in this case, Iran, off the hook. And that's exactly what we're seeing happening right now. Since taking office, President Biden has relaxed sanctions on Iranian oil exports, allowing them to do what? To produce more, to sell more, and thus to gain tens of billions of dollars. According to the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, as of last September, Iranian oil revenues had increased during the Biden administration by $26.3 billion to $29.5 billion. And we know that those numbers have just grown today. And what's Iran using the revenues on? You don't need to guess. It's terror. It's regional destabilization from the Quds Force, from Hamas to Hezbollah, from the Houthis, and from the regional militias backed by the regime. And last weekend, we saw what that means when Iran launched more than 300 drones and missiles at our ally, Israel. The attack was designed to overwhelm Israel's air defense and only failed due to the heroic efforts of a coalition that also included the United States, France, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. We know what happens. We know what happens when Iran is allowed to enrich itself. Their proxies attack Israel. They attack Israel. They fan the flames of regional war that could draw in global superpowers, and they continue their direct attacks on American troops who are present in the region to fight ISIS, among others. The Secretary of the Navy testified this week that American military ships have been attacked 130 times and used more than $1 billion in munitions in the Middle East over the last 6 months. Those are our warships. And that doesn't even count the attacks on our bases. So deterrence has been lost. The administration's Iran policy has failed, but how do they react? By suggesting that we don't go after Iran's oil. Reuters ran a story with a headline that said, quote, Biden unlikely to cut Iran's oil lifeline after Israel attack. And then Politico dished on this by saying why Biden could leave Iran's oil alone. And then the Washington Post had a well-sourced piece about the Biden administration telling Ukraine to stop attacking Russian refineries because they're nervous about the gas prices leading up to the election. I mean, I read these stories and it drives me crazy. I mean, what does Alaska have to do to get some recognition that we might just have a resource that not only we need in this country, but our friends and allies need? You've got a regime that is actively funding terror with its oil revenues, another regime that is funding a catastrophic war against an innocent people. And on the other hand, you have a state, part of the United States, that wants to responsibly develop its resources to build basic infrastructure and provide services for some of its least well-off residents. And somehow out of that, the president has decided to relax enforcement of our energy sanctions on Iran and put it on Alaska. That's what we feel like. We feel like those sanctions are on us directly. They don't want to hurt Russian production, but they're sure not hesitant to hurt Alaska. So I think you can understand why so many of us are frustrated and really even angry with the Biden administration about these policies. It is unfair to always be picked on anytime the administration needs to shore up its credibility with national environmental groups. We kind of feel like we're the giving tree at this point, except ironically, we know that this administration would never allow anyone to harvest its timber, so we can't be the giving tree. That's pretty well off limits, too. But it's also bad policy, just truly bad policy, to sacrifice our jobs and our revenues and deprive our country of steady, affordable supplies of domestic energy and minerals. And it's truly, truly bad policy to ignore the rule of law and our strategic vulnerabilities. We'll all feel the consequences as we let some of the worst people in the world produce and gain from their resources instead of the very best here at home. So, Mr. President, no state or nation produces its resources, I believe, in a more environmentally responsive manner than Alaska. No people care more about their surrounding environment than Alaska. And I know I've got my friend from Vermont here, and he cares passionately, and I know the people of Vermont care passionately. But we got a lot that we care passionately about. And so I just ask the question of colleagues, I ask the question of those in the administration, given a choice between China and Africa or Alaska for minerals, it should be Alaska every time. And given a choice between Iran and Russia and Venezuela or Alaska for oil, it should be Alaska every time. And I think most Americans would agree, but it's deeply disappointing and I believe harmful that those who hold positions of power in the Biden administration are not among them. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, good to see you. Thank
you,
you
ma'am.
for your visit to Alaska. You know you are welcome anytime. The snow is melting and the weather's getting pretty good. One of the things that I wanted to raise again with you is the Palmer Pioneer Veterans Home. We made it through the winter without losing
Yeah.
losing that roof, but
Right.
as you know, this is something that we've been watching for a long time. This is something where just last March, we got the VA Engineering Office to issue this memo stating that the threat of a roof collapse does constitute a life safety
Yep.
issue. It's been reclassified. That's great. It now goes to what I understand
list.
is top of the sub-priority group. So we made it through the winter and we had a lot of snow. But I am not certain that this roof is safe moving forward. And so the sooner, the faster we can attend to this. I would just put that before you in terms of prioritization.
You got, the good news is our engineers have come to the same conclusion you have. So it does get to the top of the list for us, but I'll stay on top of this and make sure that we stay in close touch with you.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I know all of our veterans there at the Palmer Home appreciate it. I had a meeting about a month ago with a group in Fairbanks who have been working this Fairbanks Veterans Cemetery for a long time,
Yes.
probably about 20 years now, and I appreciate that the VA has placed the vet cemetery there as a high priority among the projects to establish new cemeteries.
Yes.
But the way the list is stacked, as you well know, it puts the expansion of existing facilities. There are multiples ahead of any of the efforts to bring on a new facility. I think you've heard the benefits that a veterans cemetery in this region would be. It would serve about 65% of the state's veteran population. We have one small tribal cemetery down in Metlakatla. We have a second national cemetery that serves southeast in Sitka. We've got the one at J-Bear, but that's difficult to access.
Yeah.
So this is a very significant region of the state with a very significant population of our veterans. And again, they have been working aggressively on this. I'm hoping that the committee is going to be able to fully fund this account for FY25 and in future years. But what we're trying to do is to figure out if there's a way that there can't be, maybe it's splitting the grant funding so that you have a certain percent for expansion projects and reserve a certain percent for new construction. Because as we're looking at this list, it's going to be years and years
Surely at the current
before
level, yeah.
a new construction of a cemetery is going to be allowed to proceed. So maybe you have a better idea of a timeline that we might be able to report back to folks. But I'd like you to take a look at that list. We're going to try to do our best. I'm certainly going to put my shoulder into it on the committee here to see if we can't get that number up.
Yeah.
But even if we get it up, it's going to be a long time before you get to any new construction.
Yeah, so I've asked our team to look at this this particular Fairbanks option in the context of our overall strategic goal to have, 95% of veterans within 75 miles of a hospital.
And you
of a
definitely
cemetery.
need this one.
That's what I mean. So I
Yeah.
think this feels like it probably analytically can that may be important. So I've asked for that review.
Yeah. We're 350 miles away from the
exactly.
closest one.
Exactly. So I've asked for that review. We'll stay in close touch with you and with the whole delegation on this.
Good, I
And we'll make sure
appreciate
that the importance of this is coming through very strongly. We
Good.
got it.
Thank you. And I'm running close on time, but I'm curious about where we are with the claims backlog and the claims inventory and the backlog, because I'm told that following the PACT Act, we've seen that increase dramatically. We've also seen the claims accuracy backlog. I'm told that the accuracy rate has dropped to just over 83%, the lowest it's been in the last 10 years. I don't know if this is directly related to the claims backlog, what we're seeing with the increase, but know that this is an issue that our veterans are raising in Alaska. I'm sure that they are in other states as well. So I don't know if you can give us an update on
Definitely.
that.
Thanks for the question. Backlog as of this morning was just over 300,000 claims.
How does that
Inventory,
stack?
yeah, inventory is about 930,000 claims. So we're at, I think, if I remember that right, but I'll get you the specific number by close of business today. But we're at about a 31% backlog rating. Of the overall inventory, about 31% of the claims are backlogged. That's generally in the zone of what we have considered healthy for backlog, because we're not going to rush to get a no to a veteran
Right.
if more development will get us to yes. That's the first thing. Second, we did anticipate, by the way, we've been able to manage this. This is kind of much on the low end of what we anticipated and frankly what our model told us the backlog would be by now. And it could be, by the way, that we're on the downside of the backlog, but it's too soon to definitively state that. The main input there is people, and we've basically increased the VBA workforce by about 25% in the last 3 years, anticipating this influx of claims. So
Has that impacted the accuracy because you're bringing new people on?
Correct. So that's the last point, and this is where I'm not sure where 83% comes. I just got an update yesterday. We're at 93%. But there, frankly, we have a dispute with our IG too about he scores our accuracy differently. So I don't want to over-index the number, but there is quality concerns, which we anticipated because of so many new people and because of the training requirements. So we have throughout the course of the summer a quality stand down, which will increase enhanced training and an update of the training program to review these quality questions. Because again, this is traditional seesaw in VA. We worry about the backlog when it grows, so we over-index on the backlog number. So then all of a sudden quality comes down. So we have to kind of toggle back and forth between these two things. We've anticipated this. I hope the stand down that we're going to undertake over the course of this summer addresses that. And again, that's a training issue, and then that's an oversight and management issue. And again, because we're seeing the same thing in VBA, enhanced retention of our personnel, I feel pretty good about our ability to address that.
Thank you for your attention to this. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Peters?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary McDonough, it's good to see you again.
Sure.
Thank you for being here.
Yep.
As service members transition into civilian life, it's absolutely critical that they have the tools and the job training that they need to be successful in that transition. In 2020, my bipartisan bill, the support for veterans in effective apprenticeships.
My time to ask questions, but this morning I'm probably going to be talking more than asking questions because, quite honestly, I've got a lot to say, and I think you know it's not good feelings. Right now, the state of Alaska is looking at what is coming out of the Department of Interior, and they're not seeing a single thing that Alaskans are asking of Interior that is actually advancing. It seems like every single decision coming out of the department is working against Alaskans. You know, it was a pretty tough week, just a couple weeks ago now. In one day, the department closes off 13 million acres of our petroleum reserve. In the same day, you rejected the Ambler Access Project. And the heartburn here, I mean, it's not more than heartburn. The danger here is this is a project that is literally guaranteed by federal law. And you basically have rejected that and closed that off. You released a major land plan where it took Interior 10 full years to fail to meet the direction of a law that I wrote 20 years ago. It was to lift the PLO public land orders in Alaska. But it took no time at all to close off millions more acres in the state of Alaska. And again, the kicker on all of this is you did it all on the same day, one day, one day. We have actually come to dread Fridays in Alaska because that's when we see the stuff coming out of Washington, D.C. that is burying Alaska and our economy. These decisions are now piled on top of dozens of others, from your conservation rule to the cancellation of the leases in the 1002 area to the looming kneecapping of the oil and gas program in the area that you're mandated to carry out. You know, when there's a lot of history in Alaska, you know much of it. But when signing ANILCA, President Carter promised the deal was 100% of Alaska's offshore and 95% of our onshore would be open to responsible development. President Biden voted for that law. He voted for ANILCA, but his administration, led by your department, has broken its promises to Alaskans again and again and again. And we've kept our side of the bargain here. We've been working to do this, just that. Our environmental record is second to none. We'll put it up against anyone out there. But now it's effectively being held against us because Interior's decisions are punishing us for decades of responsible development. And ironically, it undermines the president's own policies. He's talking about all that he wants to do to advance the renewables and EVs. Well, they all require critical minerals. Well, where are we going to get the critical minerals? We have opportunities in Alaska, and a road to those minerals could have been, hopefully one day will be, a way that we're accessing that. But in addition to all of this, you're setting a precedent for future administrations to ignore the law. We pass things in Congress, we put the laws in place, and the administration does whatever they please. And it's doing nothing to protect the environment because we know that our projects are going to have small footprints. We put in place the strongest safeguards in the world here. You've heard it before, but the headline is true. This administration is sanctioning Alaska. We're sanctioning Alaska while we're boosting foreign resources. And you don't pay attention. You overlook the pollution, the human rights abuses, the regimes that it enables from Russia and Iran. And in the meantime, you've got a president that seems to think that Willow is enough to sustain an entire state. The administration here has effectively reduced Alaska to nothing more than a debit card to pay off national environmental groups in an election year. And I know that that's tough. I know that that's tough, but we can't look at it any other way. There is no valid reason. There is no good excuse for Interior's decisions. The department needs to follow the law. They need to follow the law. They need to consult with all Alaska Natives, and frankly, I think clean house at the BLM. I want you to give this some thought because we're going to have an opportunity next week at Interior Appropriations for me to ask more questions, But I want you to think about this. What justifies this? What justifies this singling out of one state alone, to treat Alaska in this way and in this manner, where you are effectively not only locking up the resources, you are going against our statehood compact, you're going against the laws that we have passed, and against policies that seemingly, as an administration, you should support. It seems like we're the giving tree, with more and more being taken from us every year, but we don't know that there is that much more to give. So again, I'll look forward to the opportunity in the Interior Committee or the subcommittee to ask these questions. You probably won't be looking forward to it as much as I will, but I think Alaskans deserve some answers.
Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank all of you for for being here today, but also for your service.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The chairman just informed me that he's going to have to excuse himself for a few minutes. So let me start with Ambler. You know the project very well. This is a proposed private haul road to a mining district that has great copper and numerous critical mineral potential. I think pretty key to the administration's push for the minerals that are needed for clean energy. And as I mentioned in my opening, ANILCA created the gates of the Arctic National Park and Preserve. It's about 8.4 million acres. The same sections of the same law provide for surface transportation access to the Ambler District. So I've got behind me a copy, or a quote from Section 201(4). And it says, in the highlighted area, Congress finds that there is a need for access for surface transportation purposes across the western Kobuk River unit of the Gates of the Arctic National Preserve from the Ambler Mining District to the Alaska Pipeline Haul Road, and the Secretary shall permit such access in accordance with the provisions of this subsection. I think the text of the law is very clear. But what is equally clear is that this was a balance here. Congress created Gates of the Arctic and then guaranteed access to Ambler. The Secretary shall permit access. So the concern, the problem that we have is when the administration announced that it will be choosing the no action alternative, it effectively denies this project to proceed, which is directly contrary to the federal law that is stated pretty clearly, and contrary to, again, this very careful balance that ANILCA struck between development and conservation. So I look at this, and as a lawyer that hasn't practiced in a long time, I can read the plain meaning of the law. Do you not see that the action that the administration has moved forward with as a no-action alternative is contrary to the clear stated intention of this section of ANILCA?
Senator, as you know, the department has not yet made a final decision regarding either of the rights-of-way for Ambler Road. The proposed 211-mile route, it crosses different lands, approximately 25 miles of BLM-managed lands and 26 miles of NPS-managed lands. ANILCA does not address Ambler Road crossing BLM-managed lands. Those are all things that we needed to take into consideration. The BLM's discretionary authority to issue a right-of-way over BLM-managed lands is found in FLIPMA, however. We don't feel that we are ignoring the law. We are, in fact, doing exactly what the law has directed, and of course, we're happy to follow up with you for the record on specific legal citations.
I think we do need to have an understanding here, because if I'm interpreting what you've just said, you're effectively saying that Congress protected the wrong lands, that it was parklands instead of BLM lands, and you're ignoring the plain text, again, of the law, which says, from the Ambler Mining District to the Alaska Pipeline Haul Road. I don't think that language could be any clearer. So the other thing that I heard you say here, though, is that this is not the final. The final is coming. I understand that. But are you suggesting here that we might see something different than the no-action alternative coming out of the administration?
I am not saying anything. I mean, I essentially don't have any news to share today with respect to that, but we are more than happy to stay in touch with your office and try to answer any other specific questions.
Well, let me ask it another way. How is this not a federal taking? How is this not a federal taking of lands that the state of Alaska owns, because nobody's disputing that they own the lands in the Ambler District, but if the administration proceeds with this, they are unable to access it despite the guarantees in federal law. How is that not a taking?
Senator, I apologize. It sounds like a specific legal question, one that our solicitor would be happy to discuss with you. And in fact, I know that you have spoken with Bob Anderson on many occasions, and I'm happy to have his office follow up.
Well, and what I would like is a formal legal analysis from Interior on how this no action decision complies with ANILCA. I want to know if you believe that the no action actually is within the law. I would like to see that before a record of decision is announced. We will now turn to Senator Reid. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Senator Peters.
Thank you. Secretary Haaland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I ran out of time with the last question, we were talking about the NPRA rule, and you had started to detail the consultation that had gone on, the numerous meetings. The reason there is such frustration over this consultation process is because there were multiple individuals that were frustrated over this issue. So it required the subcommittee to basically call on Interior to conduct additional consultation with Alaska Natives and the tribal entities on the slope. It not only came here from the committee, it came from the congressional delegation, from the legislature, and yet the department announces the publication of the final NPRA rule on April 19. Not a single effort made to conduct additional consultation as we had requested. Part of the back and forth in this that again leads to ongoing frustration is our comments from your own team. The NPRA working group met to discuss this issue in August, and one of your deputy assistant secretaries, Catherine Kovacs, stated, she says, "I'm happy to regale you with the ins and outs of the Congressional Review Act, but unfortunately we're on a schedule with this one that we don't have any control over, so we just don't have that kind of time for a rule. We're on a schedule on this one. We don't have any control over this." And so you've got a situation where it's already been forecast to people that, look, we've got this clock ticking because we want to avoid an effective veto under the CRA. How can this be considered meaningful consultation if your own department is effectively sabotaging it before it even begins? I can't believe that it's appropriate for somebody within the department to basically say, this consultation is just kind of a check-the-box exercise that we have to get behind.
Senator, I will just say that following all of those meetings that you spoke about, they extended the comment period on November 13th for an additional 20 days.
20 days, yeah.
Also, I want to say that we also reaffirm that nation-to-nation consultation is not restricted to a public comment period and could occur any time when tribal leaders request those consultations. I also would like to offer tribal engagement, a fact sheet. We can list for you all of the tribal engagements that we had, detailing that engagement for the record, if that would be helpful as well.
Is it not correct, though, that 8 times you were asked by various leaders from the North Slope region for meetings? It came all the way from Alaska to Washington, D.C. to specifically meet with you, only to have their request asked. I know that that's a fact because our offices tried to get meetings for our constituents when they traveled 5,000 miles to come and see you.
Senator, I know that our acting deputy secretary did meet along with Congresswoman Peltola.
Our acting deputy secretary did meet.
Yes.
Our Secretary of the Interior, making an extraordinarily consequential decision about lands that that this group of Alaska Native leaders call home and subsist upon. We're denied meetings 8 times. Let me ask about the department took an additional 18 days to publish the final rule in the Federal Register. I'm not sure why. What I really want to know is whether or not there were any changes between the unofficial pre-publication version of the rule and the final version.
I can't answer that for you at the moment, but I will absolutely go back to the office and ask the BLM to respond to that question.
I think it's kind of important because there's a notable gap there. Your staff had previously committed to providing a red line of the draft rule and the final rule. So can you share with me as well the red line of the unofficial publication version of the rule?
Senator, we will absolutely be in touch with your office as to those two specific questions.
I would like to get that red line by the end of this next week, if we can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And
Senator Peters, Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And good to see you, Madam Secretary. Going to stick with seafood here. And I want to start with what I know you have been read into, but we are really getting concerned. As you know, fisheries disasters in and around Alaska, but in other parts of the country, and these disaster monies being held up. And right now, we're looking at literally, I mean, you can't describe it as anything other than a massive backlog, and it relates to this new business applications solutions, getting the payments out to NOAA employees, the vendors, the partners. It has been a technical issue that you're starting a new system, but you started it with a program where you have people that are so vulnerable and have waited so long. I mean, in Alaska, and I don't know whether it's in other states, probably in the chairman's, but we're looking at fisheries disasters that were declared back in 2019, and these people still have yet to receive their disaster funding. It's really outrageous. So can you share with the committee where you are, what you're doing to address these failures, when we can expect this system to be operational? I don't know if we can call it fully functional, but at least operational.
Yeah.
We got to help these folks.
Yeah. So first of all, I agree with you, and I know how serious it is. I really do. I've spoken to you. I've spoken to other members. I've spoken to fishermen myself in Alaska, and I want you to know I don't take it lightly. The fishery disaster assistance has candidly never been a fast process.
It's been awful.
Yeah, for like ever, it's never been a fast process. The new law that you have passed is good, effective, and pushing us to streamline. But as you know, it's very data intensive. We have to get the catch limits, the data from the past, compare it to today. It's an arduous process and it takes time. The BAS implementation only made it worse. Here's what I can tell you. We expect some decisions in the next month or so. BAS
Decisions with regards to getting the funding out
Yes.
the door then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, for providing funding. BAS, if this may be cold comfort for you, but I personally have a meeting on a weekly basis with the BAS team to get this thing back on track. IT systems, I've been doing this for 15 years, never seem to go the way they should in government. It's not an excuse, but it's complicated. So the good news is the system is now working. The actual software is working. We are processing vouchers and grants at the same rate that we were pre-BAS. The challenge now is that we had a 20-year-old system that individuals knew how to work with. Now they have to learn a whole new system, so we're still slow. But long story short, we are through the worst of it, not totally out of the BAS woods. I'll follow up with you on Alaska specifically, but I think you're going to see some improvement soon.
Well, we need to see that because we're going into yet another season.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, prepare yourself for another round of disasters. But our fishermen are giving up on the whole disaster declaration process because they just can't see the help coming in any time.
We will get better.
Thank you. Another question, and this relates to your budget, that is very concerning. What we've been saying to people who are very stressed about what we're seeing in the oceans and what's happening, particularly with salmon, but in other species as well, crab. We're saying, we got to get more data, we got to get more science, we got to count on NOAA, we need to make sure their budget is there. And then we learn that the 2024 Alaska Longline Survey is going to be suspended this year. We understand it's high cost. Of course, it's high cost. But historically, the Alaska Fisheries Science Center has been able to conduct the survey through a cost recovery effort. We know that we've got increased operating expenses. We get all that. But we established the Fisheries Survey Contingency Fund in FY24 to provide funding for instances like this and to help prevent the unexpected cancellations. So I'm just going to again reinforce the importance of these marine surveys. We want to make sure that our fisheries are going to be sustainable even in challenging times, but we've got to know as much as we possibly can. We have to have these marine surveys. So is there any assurance that you can give me in this category?
Yes. I mean, in the FY25 budget, we've prioritized the surveys. The Longline survey is paid for actually by industry.
Right.
And, costs are going up, so it's a challenge for industry. I can tell you, we're very focused on it. It's always a tough decision to postpone or cancel a survey. We don't like to do that. We are being creative as we can to make sure that we get the best science, and we strive to meet our core responsibilities. I share the priority and the concern.
Well, and we talked about this during COVID when we lost years of surveys, a couple years of surveys, which was horribly detrimental. So I'm just going to reinforce, I'll be the broken record on it. I do have more questions that I want to submit for the record, but thank you, Madam Secretary.
Thank you,
By the way,
Senator.
next week I'm talking to a group of Alaskan commercial fishermen just to hear and learn and listen. I'm not saying we're doing everything perfectly, but I definitely want you to know how seriously we take it.
Thank you. Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here this morning. We have had an opportunity over the past year to engage on a couple of different issues in my state, certainly Homer, the Barrow coastal erosion, and I want to thank you for a pretty pragmatic approach to working with me and my team and your focus on the Alaska projects and the partnership going forward. I think the more we can be open and communicating well with one another, the better off we're going to be. I am pleased to see funding for the Port of Nome construction and the Homer GI, both included in the 24 work plan as well as the FY25 budget request. As you know, these are very high priorities, particularly the Port of Nome, due to its national security significance. But that being said, there's been a lot of advocacy to ensure that both of these projects stay on track. So I'm a little bit concerned going into the 25 process and beyond that we're going to appropriately prioritize these in the budget process. Concerning Nome particularly, this kind of seems to be a case study in rhetoric versus reality, with our nation's challenge to match the projects of national security and economic significance with the processes that we have at our disposal and how to fund them. We know that Port of Nome is a civil works project. Senator Sullivan and I have been talking to a lot of our national security officials and flag officers, both directly and in person and off the record, as we underscore the strategic and national security imperative into the Arctic region. A lot of dual-use benefits for both commercial and national security interests in the Arctic, where we've seen investment really lacking, and I think both of you would agree with that. And yet, while we've got some unanimity on the value of the project, we can't seem to get the same level of enthusiasm or gusto when it comes to funding it. This year's budget request of $25 million is the first regular order construction request for the project, notwithstanding NOM's previous award of $250 million for construction, which was due, of course, to IJA. So that $25 million, it's absolutely essential. I think we all know it's far from the cost to complete. So we're looking at a project that's going to be in the range of $500 million. And so I look at the $25 million request and don't see this as adequate to meet the project's requirement. Maybe it's because the project is not a great fit for the National Economic Development funding formula under which it was authorized. So I'm using my time here to suggest that it's time that the Corps work with Congress to figure out some creative ways to adequately fund this project and perhaps some others that recognizes the national security benefits as well as the economic benefits. So I'm hoping that we're going to see future budget requests that will make very meaningful progress on fully funding the project's construction costs. So I'm hoping that maybe you can give me a little more optimism here with a budget request number in FY26 that reflects the cost to complete the project. But also, I'd like to have your assurance that for future budget requests, you'll treat the projects authorized under this authority like NOM, consistent with the provision in Title 33, Section 2242C of the U.S. Code. So, in other words, making sure that it is given equivalent budget consideration and priority as projects recommended solely by national economic development benefits. A long statement there, but you know where I'm going with this. We've got to figure out what the funding plan is going to be for a port like Nome, given the national security imperative. Because if we're going to do $25 million every funding cycle, the Arctic is never going to be addressed. We need a deep water Arctic port.
Yes, Senator. So I think I'll try to give you some assurance here. I think this is more sequencing than in terms of a budget issue. So with the $250 million that came to us in the bipartisan infrastructure law and the $25 million in this budget, that's going to allow us to award what we're calling the phase one, the West Breakwater extension. We need to get that in place before we can start the work on the actual harbor deepening. We can express that capability as early as 25. That's about a $95 million job. And then the final phase of this is the new East Causeway. We estimate about $151 million, but we have what we need to get this first work done. Then we're going to work on the budget for the deepening and then the remaining work to complete the project.
Secretary Connor?
Yeah, if I could just add on the bigger picture question that you raised in your comment, I would agree this is not a great NED fit in our traditional analyses, but yet we did get it in the budget, which I think represents progress, and it's for a lot of the reasons that you've just identified. And we are working on, expanding the range of what we view the benefits of our projects are. My predecessor put in place something called comprehensive benefits, asked the Corps to look at comprehensive benefits as we're planning projects and integrate that and assess that as part of our chief's reports that we're putting together. We're trying to take that to the next step now and to look at institutionalizing that approach through our principles, requirements, and guidelines that maximize our look at benefits. This is net public benefits. It doesn't specifically address national security, but we're moving in this direction to recognize that we can't, purely just look at NED benefit costs in assessing the value of these projects. So we want to continue. I think there's appetite for that from all quarters of people invested in the Corps projects, and we will continue to work in the way that you suggested here.
Well, let's keep, again, we got to have open lines of communication here, and we can't have everybody holding their breath, waiting for the next funding cycle, hoping that that we're going to get enough for that next phase. So I'd really like to keep close on this project as well as some of the others we're working on. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. That will end our hearing today, and I want to thank our witnesses and all of my colleagues for participating in.
We have Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief, good to see you again. You were in front of the Interior Appropriations Subcommittee just about a month ago. You made a comment then that resonated with me. You said, I can tell you with certainty that if we do not have a vibrant timber industry, we're not going to be able to manage our forests and make them healthy and resilient. Good statement, but it just seems contradictory to the way that the Tongass and the Chugach National Forests are managed. The Forest Service has completely shifted away from offering viable inventories of timber, and in the case of the Tongass, they really have just pulled the rug out from under the industry. You and I have talked about this a lot, but they abandoned the transition policy that, that Secretary Vilsack forced on them during the Obama administration. So we have a timber industry that is practically non-existent right now. And it kind of speaks to your statement about it's impossible to have a healthy and resilient forest without a vibrant timber industry. Well, we don't have a vibrant timber industry. So can you share with me, other than research into end-use forest products, what is the Forest Service doing to help support the few remaining small mill operators that are located in the Tongass?
So Senator Murkowski, you know better than anyone just the history of timber there.
I know it all too well. I've lived it.
And I still stand by my statement that without a vibrant timber industry, we will not be able to manage our nation's
So what
forests.
do I tell our small mill operators there in Southeast? Is there a future for them, or do they need to just pack up, let their employees go elsewhere?
Well, I certainly think there's a future there. I think what we need to do is work on how much of that is available to be harvested. And I'm still committed.
Well, it's the largest national forest in the country.
Yes.
There's plenty of available timber. It's the supply, as you well know, and the sales that are put up that don't result in anything for even the smallest of the small timber sawmills.
And you know, Senator, we're guided by a lot of policies and regulations, and so...
And the policies and regulations are such that the Tongass has been shut down effectively for timber harvesting. I mean, that's pretty much it. Let me shift to the Southeast Alaska Sustainable Strategy, because that was Vilsack's promise. We're going to cut off timber, we're going to not be harvesting, or certainly not putting up available sales for timber there, but we're going to give you resources from the federal government. $25 million was the first tranche. And I had asked you last month about the funding that Secretary Vilsack had promised. He said, again, the $25 million is the first tranche. I asked for an update on additional funding. You shared with me the same thing that Secretary Vilsack did, that, well, Southeast has gotten funding through IJA and through IRA. That is true. But as I reminded everybody, this promise on the Southeast Sustainable Strategy was well before we had even thought about IJA or IRA. And so, in fairness, that does not count. That is not keeping the promise of Secretary Vilsack. So you indicated that you were going to double check on the status of where we are, what Southeast might be able to expect, because right now, I've got these small local mills that are thinking, well, okay, maybe that's part of our survivability strategy, is that we're going to be getting some kind of support from these additional sources of funding from the Southeast Sustainable Strategy.
Yeah, Senator, you are right. We had the $25 million originally, and since then, we've provided an additional $50 million. But I'll look to see how much of that is IJA and how much of that is other funding. But I know that it was 50 additional million.
I bet I can beat you to the breakdown on that, unfortunately. One quick question here before my time is out. You know that just last week we introduced the Chugach Alaska Land Exchange Oil Spill Recovery Act. This grants Chugach ownership of approximately 65,000 acres of culturally significant, economically viable full estate and surface lands. This completes the promise under the Dingell Act. This is the result of several years of groundwork by the entire Alaska delegation and working with the Department of Interior and Forest Service. I know you've worked on that But I'm hoping that I can get your commitment that Forest Service is going to work proactively with our office so that we can advance this legislation and address this split state ownership challenge.
Yes, we're committed to continuing to work with you on that.
Okay, we want to get it done sooner than later. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the panelists. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to hear your opening statements, but had an opportunity to look at the background. I want to focus on access to oral health, dental care in rural areas, because it's really hard. I grew up in a part of the state where if you needed to go to the dentist, you got in an airplane or you got on a ferry, and more often than not, you went to Seattle. And that was not a cheap trip, but that was how we got our health care. We have improved dramatically since then, but we still have far too many communities where access is an issue. So far as I know, you can't fill a cavity through telehealth. And so how we have been able to address this requires a little bit of thinking outside the box. The dental health aid therapist program, the DHAT program, is something that we put in place in Alaska. We got a lot of pushback from the American Dental Association, who thought that this was going to be encroaching on their territory, and I said, you send me all the dentists that you want to come out to rural Alaska, and for more than just a couple weeks stint, because these kids don't need dental care just 1 week or 2 weeks out of the year. We need somebody, and so we'll take a mid-level. We'll take somebody who will work with kids to encourage them on simple dental hygienics. And so we have made some good progress, but there is still so much more that we need to do to address access to dental care in our rural communities. I think, Dr. Swan, you may have mentioned the DHAT program, but share with me, if you will, what more we can do, what more we must do in our more rural and remote areas, because we're seeing health outcomes, overall health outcomes, that have been impacted negatively because it began with poor oral health care.
Right. I agree with you, and I think that in the state of Alaska, you've been a prime example with a state that large and being able to get a program that is seeing people. And I read just last year, in the 10 or 12 years you've had this program, there hasn't been one malpractice lawsuit.
That's right.
So it's working, and I think that we have to address that. Rural areas, we need more role models. In the schools of education where we're teaching young people to become doctors, they need to see people who are able to function and work in rural areas. We don't see that necessarily in our faculty. There needs to be incentives, I think, that would help people, and just really innovative business models, GPR programs, general practice residency programs, those type of programs, I think, work like in the state of New York, where it's a requirement to get a license that you spend 1 year doing public work. I think that works, and I just think that the rural communities would benefit from that.
Other comments?
Mm-hmm.
Just to underscore, and thank you, Senator Murkowski, for raising this, just to underscore some of what you said, our research shows that over 1/3 of rural residents do not have dental insurance coverage. 4 in 10 adults in rural areas have not seen a dentist in over a year, which is about 10% higher than suburban and urban areas. We also know that 67% of rural areas are health professional shortage areas. And so when I think about solutions, it is generally what Dr. Swan has said in terms of incentivizing providers, but also, to your point, creating a greater opportunities for ancillary providers to provide services in rural areas and expanding the scope of practice in order to be able to do that.
And one of the things that we see is a great disparity. I'm talking about rural, but so many of our rural communities are predominantly Alaska Native, and so our Native population just suffers disproportionately when it comes to negative health outcomes related to dental health. So it's not an issue of insurance. I can tell you, I go around to the small regional or sub-regional clinics, and we will have a dental chair, but it's practically brand spanking new, great equipment, because we can't get the providers that are out there. So everything that we can be doing to focus on training those who will take on it's a challenge. It's a challenge. It's hard. It's not easy when you're moving around, when you really don't have the place to stay in these small communities. But it's an experience that ought to count for some level of support for the training. And I would urge us all to think about how we fully connect all these dots. It's one thing to make it available with the chairs and the equipment. It's another thing to get the providers that are out there, whether they are the dentists or the mid-levels like we have with the DHATs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hassan.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and welcome. Good to see you, Madam Secretary. General, thank you for being here and your leadership. We talk a lot about the various aircraft, the equipment, but I think we know that as good as that may be, if we fail to invest adequately in our soldiers, that's where we fail. That's where we have the vulnerabilities. So we've had these conversations before about how we really take a whole of person approach in addressing the physical, the mental, the emotional, even the spiritual needs of our soldiers. We've had the discussion about conditions in Alaska and some of the challenges that present themselves that often contribute to mental health struggles. One of the things that we have found that is amazing in its effort or its ability to uplift morale is this program that we authorized in the FY23 NDAA, and this is the Fly Back Home. When particularly a junior service member who is maybe in Alaska and calls New York or Maine home, the cost of an airplane ticket is prohibitively expensive. And so when we put this in place, what we saw was not only good, strong usage of it, but excitement about what it did. It basically gave people something to look forward to, and in terms of a mental health boost, it was really quite considerable. So, General George, I would ask if you would speak to the value of such a program for our soldiers, and Secretary, if you can then comment as to whether the Army intends to restart the flyback program. General.
Thanks, Senator, and I agree with you, your comment up front that our edge is our soldiers and making sure that we're investing in them. We're really proud. I think a lot of things that we have done, and we have seen General Eifler in the 11th Airborne Division up there, has informed things across the Army. So they're doing great. And first and foremost is they're doing great training up there. And, we're continuing to invest in that because I think that that's critically important. And I know you've had an opportunity to see that. What we like to say is that every location is unique, and we need to be able to do unique things like the Fly Back Home program. That's very unique, given where they're at, and is helpful for us. And I think that we have to look at every installation like that a little bit different. I will tell you that Alaska is near the top. We offer stations of choice. There's a lot of people that want to go up and serve in Alaska. That has helped, with us for our recruiting. And I think it's they want to come up to Alaska and experience that. But it's also because they do a really good job of taking care of their soldiers and their families. And I think it starts there.
We're making some headway, but again, it's these little things. Secretary, can you comment on whether or not there's any intention to restart the program?
Certainly, Senator Murkowski. I think what I'd like to do is, as you know, we have the Fly Home program. We also have the remote conditions and austere incentive pay for Wainwright and Jay Bear, and have spent, I think, over $25 million on that. And then our vice chief right now is really stepping back and reviewing our MTO for the entire 11th Airborne Division to see if we're investing it the way that we need. What I'd like to do is commit to you to look at the cost benefits of restarting the Fly Home program. We are under a flat top line, so every dollar we're constantly in a Peter and Paul situation. But I know it was a popular program, and I would commit to you that we will look at that, but I'd like to look at it in in the context of some of the other programs that we're doing.
Well, and since you raised the MTO, it really does speak to the gaps that we're seeing there with the 11th, including the lack of the MTO, the equipment to define what equipment is appropriate for the Arctic, the lack of the division artillery, the lack of sustainment brigade, the lack of an aviation headquarters. So I'm glad to know that you are reviewing that. I'm hopeful that we're going to see some progress on this soon, that this is not something that we're going to be studying for a long while. I think we recognize what has been put in place with the 11th, the focus on the Arctic strategy and the need to emphasize the dominance there. But we have to have it all lined up. We just can't have it in name only or in title only. I think you both recognize that. So I don't know if you can inform me as to timing on what we might expect for progress on this. General, do you know?
Yeah, we're getting together and having these discussions. I just would tell you, Senator, the things that I think we need to grow first and foremost with structure is counter-UAS capabilities, counter-UAS batteries. I think we need to grow additional integrated air and missile defense, and we need to grow some long-range fire. So we're obviously looking at it. This, total Army analysis is something that we're, need to do. We did upgun the aviation, oversight up there and added some slots to do that, to make sure that we're, kind of have the right oversight up there with that. But I'm just putting it in context that if we're going to grow capabilities, it would be my recommendation that we would grow some of these other things first. I'm not saying that those aren't all, that aren't important, but we would need to grow those other capabilities first.
We'll look forward to working with you and getting the updates on this. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Stone Manning, you've said that what BLM does every day is try to achieve balance, but yet in my state, in Alaska, it seems that you have abandoned any pretense of balance. Except for the reapproval of Willow following the law, we appreciate that. BLM is restricting development however and wherever it can. And we've seen this in our petroleum reserve, we've seen this in the 1002 area through the public land orders, the resource management plans, the rejection just recently of the Ambler Access Project. It feels like an onslaught to me, and it's not just me that's noticing this. It is other people who are making a joke out of it. It's not a joke. You see, they're putting sanctions on oil and gas production. Where? Iran, Venezuela? No, Alaska. It's a red state. It's a joke there, but it's not a joke back home. It's not a joke at all because it has direct consequences on our jobs, on our revenues. It hurts our energy, our mineral security. Despite the press releases coming out of the administration, it doesn't help the environment because what it's doing, it's helping to degrade global ecosystems by incentivizing foreign projects to move forward without the protections and the standards that we would have here. So I'm angry, I'm frustrated. You know that. I've suggested that we need to clean house, we need to cut BLM's budget, at least until the agency realizes that they've got to follow federal law, that it actually matters, that the commitment to balance matters. So let me start my questions with something that we just learned about yesterday. And unfortunately, we didn't learn about it from BLM. We didn't learn about it from DOI. We learned about it from the governor's office, who asked for information from my office about what's the deal with PLO 5150. So you know very well what I'm talking about. BLM recently finalized its Central Yukon Resource Management Plan, its RMP, and as part of that, BLM decided not to lift PLO 5150 for the TAPS pipeline corridor. The state had selected this decades ago as part of its statehood entitlement. And by law, BLM is supposed to convey the selected lands in a timely manner. They hadn't been moving on it, so I passed a law 20 years ago. My law in 2004 directs BLM to lift PLOs in Alaska. And then in 2006, BLM recommends lifting PLOs on over 50 million acres and recommended that the best way to do that is through the RMP process. So we've got an RMP process. We got it for the Central Yukon. That's been going on for over a decade. And now what happens? BLM reverses course from the previous administration, refuses to lift PLO 5150 as part of its land planning process. Instead, they got a new promise here. What we're going to do is launch a new process with a tiered environmental assessment as soon as the Central Yukon plan was finished. And this is going to allow BLM to finalize the RMP and then move forward on a compromise for PLO 5150. And this was going to be a compromise developed by the state of Alaska that would protect subsistence and involve far less changing ownership. We didn't really think that that was perfect, but everyone that I knew of was willing to support it. BLM repeatedly, until like last week, told my office and Alaska DNR that they were going to do it. And so the state worked with the BLM for more than a year. And you're very well read into this because you drove the Dalton Highway last summer with the commissioner and the deputy commissioner. And then this week, we learned, nope, it's not happening. It's over. The plan is dead. The commitment is revoked. The Central Yukon RMP is over. It's done. There won't be a supplemental process to lift the outdated PLO for the pipeline corridor. I don't understand how you can sit here, how those in your department, all the way up to the secretary, can sit here and make these empty promises and then break them whenever you feel like you want to break them. And so I want to know, who canceled BLM's commitment to move forward on the state of Alaska's compromise on PLO 5150? And if it wasn't you, who was it?
Senator, I know that's really important to you. I know it's really important.
It's really important, and we got zero word, zero, nothing. Is it happening?
I wouldn't call it canceled.
Okay, what would you call it?
My conversation with the commissioner last week was about how we're up against some timing issues and some workload issues throughout the department.
What does that mean?
And our plates are full, and that we're not moving forward with the EA in the timeline that we had originally
I don't understand what you have just said. Is the project canceled?
No.
Is the project delayed?
The EA is, I guess delay is the right word.
Is the project delayed for the duration of this administration, or are you continuing to work on it? Is it dead as far as your office is concerned?
Senator, no, it is not dead as far as my office is concerned.
Then what's happening?
As I was saying, our plates are full. I like to make sure that we get things done and
Who made this decision?
Done well.
Who made the decision?
It was a collective decision about workload, which I always
was it you? Was it someone at the department, or was it out of the White House itself?
It was a collective decision about workload with the department.
With the department, so the White House wasn't directing this?
Not that I know of.
Okay, I'm actually just stunned with your response here today. You knew we were going to have an opportunity to discuss this, and the fact that you can't give me really a straight answer as to where you are. Workload, give me a break. You've been working on this for 10 years. 10 years. And now you've come and you can't tell me whether or not it's canceled, it's delayed, if it's going to continue, if it's dead for the duration of this administration. My time is over, but I'm hopeful we have a second round.
Senator.
Let me just try to wrap up where we were with PL 5150. Do you have any idea the cost of the process, what it took to get to the draft RMP EIS?
For the Central Yukon?
Yes.
I don't. It's in the millions of dollars, but I don't have the draft figure.
The 2020 draft RMP EIS cost the BLM a little over $5 million to produce. The final RMP EIS document says that it cost the lead agency, BLM, $6.7 million to produce. To kind of put that into perspective, the FY25 budget requests $28.8 million for the entire Alaska conveyance account. So you can see my frustration here. You've spent somewhere between $5 and $6 million of a $28 million entire budget, 10 years, and have gotten nowhere. And what you've told me is you have a manpower issue, which makes no sense to me that you would invest this money, invest this time, and then say, well, later. You made a commitment to me when you were before this committee 3 years ago, and you said, you have my commitment that I understand the job is to follow the law and that the federal government has commitments to the state of Alaska. You acknowledge those commitments to the state of Alaska. You know very well the Alaska Land Transfer Acceleration Act because I asked you about it then. I mentioned the report in 2009, the updated report in 2019, finding that the lifting of the vast majority of these withdrawals for the PLOs would be, quote, consistent with the protection of the public interests in these lands. Approximately 95% of these withdrawals would be that could be lifted are consistent with the protections of the public's interest. So you've got these findings, you've got the recommendation. How I don't understand how the recommendation within the Central Yukon RMP to not lift any of the public land orders in that area is consistent with the act, consistent with your commitment to me that says, I get it, I know that the federal government has commitments to the state of Alaska, they're outlined in the law, and then 10 years, millions of dollars, and never mind, because that's where we're feeling like we are right now.
Senator, I'm going to get back for the record for you the budget question. It's my understanding that the Central Yukon RMP budget came out of our planning budget, not the conveyance budget.
So whether it came out of the conveyance budget or the planning budget, you've spent millions of dollars, 10 years, and you've gotten nowhere. The last thing that I would like from you is in her hearing on May 8th, Secretary Holland was before this committee, and in response to me, on the Ambler Road, she promised that she would, quote, be happy to follow up with me on specific legal justifications. I asked the Secretary to provide, to make clear where it says that the access is superseded, Ambler's access is superseded by general right-of-way authorities for BLM provided by FLTMA. So, as a lawyer, I looked at that and said, that makes no sense to me. So I asked her, give me the specific legal justification. She said, happy to follow up. That was over a month ago. Can you give me that analysis that the Secretary promised?
Senator, the legal underpinnings, especially on our 810 requirements under ANILCA for subsistence, are going to be outlined and documented in the record of decision, which is forthcoming.
Well, it seems to me that when I asked the Secretary and she says, I will be happy to follow up with me on specific legal justifications, I don't feel like I should have to wait until I get a final record of decision to understand that. I think I had a commitment from the Secretary, as I think I had a commitment from you 3 years ago, and I don't think that either one of you are following up on it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator.
It's Monday afternoon. We're back for what appears to be the last week of full session before we are due to go on an August recess. Lots to do back home, but clearly lots to do here in the Senate as well. And it looks that this week we're going to probably spend the end of the week wrapping up some of the nominations that are out there. And I want to speak to a nomination that I feel very, very strongly about and would hope that we will have an opportunity to weigh in as a Senate on a priority that I don't think that enough of us as Americans think about our role as an Arctic nation. And so as we are processing nominations, I want to kind of move our attention to the top of the world up in the Arctic. We have a lot of hot spots in the world right now. And the last thing in the world that we need is for the Arctic to become one of those hotspots. And whether we want it to or not, whether we want to will it away or not, the Arctic is increasingly gaining attention by others for different reasons, and the fact that the United States doesn't have that diplomatic presence, if you will, is a disservice, I believe, to us as an Arctic nation. So I have come to urge this body to take up the nomination of Dr. Mike Svrega. Mike is an Alaskan, but he would be our nation's first ambassador at large for Arctic affairs. So we've not had a confirmed ambassador at large position. We've had a special representative to the Arctic, but when you send a, quote, special representative to some of these dialogues to sit at tables with other countries' ambassadors, there is a disparity there. And I think we have recognized the importance and the role of this ambassador at large position. Dr. Svrega was nominated in February of 2023. He was reported out of the Foreign Relations Committee this March, and it's time for us to take him up and confirm him. And I get it. I mean, there is a lot going on. I mentioned hot spots around the world. You look at what is happening in Ukraine and in Israel and Taiwan and China, North Korea. You've got everything that's happening domestically, and sometimes I think the Arctic is out of sight, out of mind for many. But it is important that we not lose sight of the consequential nature of the Arctic itself. Again, we use the phrase, it's a cold place, but it's becoming its own hot spot. And so what we can do, again, to assert not only our areas of oversight and overlay, but also from the diplomatic perspective is something that I think is worthy of focusing on. So why this time, why this particular nominee? First, we've got incredible opportunities on the Arctic issues, everything from resource development to tourism to shipping to infrastructure. You have the people who live and work and raise their family there. Thousands of American Alaskans live in the Arctic, and their interests deserve to be taken seriously and represented in the highest councils of our government. We also have the very dynamic situation in the Arctic right now with climate change, with national security, engagement with other nations. So let's just talk about our neighbor to Alaska's west there, and that is Russia, the largest Arctic nation. Their war on Ukraine is now in its third year, but is being powered by their revenues from oil and from gas, and now more and more, also from seafood. Russia is increasingly shipping its oil through the Northern Sea route, which has the potential to threaten Alaskan waters and our marine resources. They're testing a combat icebreaker, which could give it significant strategic advantage that we currently lack. You are very well, Madam President, that in this country, we lack that icebreaking capacity. We have one operational icebreaker. She is currently at dry dock and will be there for a period of months. Our medium strength icebreaker, the Healy, it was just reported last Thursday, had a fire aboard ship as it was going across the Northwest Passage. And I have not yet received the report, but my understanding is that vessel is not in a condition to continue with the mission that they had set out on. And that's it. That's it. We've worked through the appropriations process to authorize the icebreaking capacity to build out the fleet. We are not there. We're not even close to being there. In fact, the updates that we get from the Coast Guard on this are beyond frustrating. They are to the point where we've got a responsibility to ensure that the commitment that we have made for the taxpayer dollars, for the infrastructure that we need, which is the icebreaker, we've got to line these up, and we've got to line them up quickly. Last week was an interesting week. I know that Senator Sullivan and I had some pretty in-depth briefings from the head of NORAD and the head of the Alaska Command when we saw really an unprecedented air exercise between the Russian Bear bombers, 2 of them coming together, coordinating with 2 Chinese H-6s, coming into the Alaskan ADIZ, into our area, some close to basically separating these aircraft by about 200 miles from our shore, close enough to certainly get our attention. They were operating within the rules, and they were operating safely. But again, it's a demonstration, a show of partnership that, while it may not be the first time that we've seen the Russian and the Chinese flying together, we've never seen them in these northern areas. And so it begs the question, why? What is their interest up there? So making sure that we are engaged has got to be a priority. I mentioned seafood. People don't necessarily think about the prospect or the reality that Russia would be engaged in economic warfare on seafood, over-harvesting fisheries that are shared with Alaska, selling that over-harvest to China for reprocessing, to get around the sanctions that are in place, and generally throwing the global seafood markets into chaos, all to generate additional revenues for its war machine. And this threatens not only the species, the seafood, but also the way of life for so many who count on the fisheries for their very existence. In many, many areas, we are seeing the Russians and the Chinese partnering to help enhance the Chinese position in the far north. I mentioned the activity that we just saw last week in the air. We're seeing the cooperation and the collaboration on Russian energy, the collaboration with processing of Russian seafood. Now, Russian Federation Security Service has signed a memorandum of understanding with the Chinese Coast Guard to enhance maritime security cooperation in the North Pacific, in the Bering Sea, and in the Arctic. Last year, one of the pictures that got, again, a lot of attention was a flotilla of 11 Russian and Chinese warships off the Aleutian Islands. Just a few weeks ago, there was a new flotilla of Chinese military ships that transited the U.S. EEZ off of Alaska. So, Madam President, we know that they're not going out whale watching or looking at the glaciers. This is activity that is close to Alaska, along our shared maritime border with Russia, and just beyond our sovereign territory. But I share these because these are the events that are happening now. These are the events that are happening now, and they're capturing the attention of the country. And so making sure that as we're paying attention to these current events, we have somebody whose day job is to do nothing more than monitor, engage, work with the State Department, work with our friends and allies, work with the administration. We've made some good progress in recent years on infrastructure in the Arctic. We have done a lot more in partnering from a diplomatic perspective by putting a consulate there in Nuuk in Greenland, but we've got to do a lot more to ensure our nation's interests and well-being in the region. And that's why it comes down to right people in the right place, the right people in the right place. And this is why I am so strong in urging that we take up Dr. Srega's nomination to be the Arctic Ambassador at Large. He's got over 3 decades of experience on Arctic issues. He is he's chair of the U.S. Arctic Research Commission and has been since 2021. Prior to his nomination for Ambassador at Large, he was the founding director of the Polar Institute, He was the director of the Global Risk and Resilience Program at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C. He serves as chair and distinguished fellow in the Polar Institute. He was a co-lead scholar at the State Department for the Fulbright Arctic Initiative. He has served as chair of the Committee of Visitors Review of the Section for Arctic Science, Office of Polar Programs, National Science Foundation. He earned the first PhD in Geography and Northern Studies from the University of Alaska in Fairbanks. The guy knows the Arctic. He gets it. He is clear-eyed about the realities and the intentions of our adversaries. He understands what we need to do to advance our nation's equities in the Arctic. He knows the people, he knows the scenes, and they know him. That is really incredibly important. They're waiting for us. They're waiting for us to confirm Dr. Srega's nomination. They've worked with him in the past, and they're really anxious to have him in this position. I was at an event last week. It was the going away for Iceland's ambassador to the United States. Her next role is a newly created role. She'll be Iceland's ambassador to the Arctic at large. We should confirm our own already. The Arctic is where our domestic policy meets foreign policy. It's where homeland defense meets the protection of our national fisheries. It's where our changing climate meets increased resource development and shipping and trade. It's where NATO's other flank, its western flank, meets Russia and China. It is the most strategically important place in the world. So, Madam President, I know that people are looking at our calendar. They're saying that time is running short. I don't disagree, but I think it's critically important that we have somebody of Dr. Srega's caliber in this position. We need to have that representation, and I would certainly urge the Senate to act on his nomination, hopefully before we're able to conclude at the end of this week. The reality is, if we want to do right by the Arctic and all of our growing interests and challenges in the region, we really can't wait any longer. And with that, Madam President, I yield the floor.
First, let me state I'm thankful this committee was able to include 2 modest hydro provisions in the bill. But I think if you heard from my colleague from Alaska and myself, I'm disappointed we were not able to include more of our bipartisan.
We're committed to work on it, sir. We're going to get it there.
Hydropower, thank you. Hydropower amendments in the manager's package. Senator Murkowski and I introduced, in fact, 8 amendments related to hydro. You can't have an energy permitting bill without addressing the needs of our vast hydropower fleet. This amendment, Daines 33, is easy. It's got a long history in this very committee. Here's all it does. It simply confirms that hydropower is a renewable resource and updates federal policy to reflect exactly that. Only in Washington, D.C., is it controversial to say that hydropower is renewable. So let me state a very controversial statement here in D.C. Hydropower is renewable. This committee passed similar language in 2015 when my colleague from Alaska was chairman, where many of these members who are present here today voted yes. This is easy, it's non-controversial, it's long overdue. It simply says hydropower is a renewable source of energy. I urge my colleagues to vote yes, and I ask for a roll call vote.
Any further comments on this? My comment will be the same as it was before. We are committed. We put hydro into a Title 7. We're committed to work and do everything we possibly can. We got 3 of the ones that were easier to define. We have a little work to do on these, but we're committed to do it. So I'd ask if we have, you are asking for a roll call on this?
I am, yep.
And I would consider to vote no on this so we can get it done right.
And Mr. Chairman, I agree with your statement. We'll join you.
Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Manchin?
No.
Mr. Wyden? No. Ms. Cantwell?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Sanders?
No by proxy.
Mr. Heinrich? Ms. Hirono?
No by proxy.
Mr. King? Ms. Cortez Masto? Mr. Hickenlooper? Mr. Padilla? Mr. Barrasso?
No.
Mr. Risch?
Aye. Oh.
Mr. Lee?
No by proxy.
Mr. Daines?
Aye.
Ms. Murkowski?
Aye.
Mr. Hoven. Mr. Cassidy.
Aye by proxy.
Mrs. Hyde-Smith.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Hawley. On this vote, the ayes are 8 and the noes are 11.
Amendment fails.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Murkowski.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to bring up amendment number 25. This is also in the hydro title, and I appreciate what you and the ranking member have said about hydro and the commitment to work on these matters going forward. I thank you for that, and I look forward to that. This is one, though, where we do have a hydro title. There have been several hydro provisions that have been accepted, which I appreciate, as I say. But this is one that, to me, should just really be in the easy bucket. And perhaps if we can have a discussion about why it's complicated right now, I'm happy to listen to that. But let me just share what we're trying to do here. We clarify in our amendment that a licensee is not going to be required to provide prior notification to or obtain approval from the Commission for any non-substantial alteration or addition of project works under the plans that have been approved by the Commission. And they also can't be required to provide the notification if it's routine maintenance, repair, or replacement of a portion of the project that's consistent with a reasonable standard of care for any seasonal or temporary adjustments. So what I'm talking about here is if you do something that doesn't result in a substantial change to the project works plan that has already been approved by the FERC, you're not going to be required to submit a license amendment. If you're conducting routine maintenance work on your project's work, you don't need to file a license amendment and get FERC approval. If you are conducting an activity that does result in substantial change, then this amendment doesn't change anything. You're still required to file a license amendment application as required by the law and the regulation. So we get all that. But what we're seeing at least in Alaska, and I think it probably in yours as well, small operators are being forced by FERC to file for license amendments for these routine maintenance and in-kind replacements of equipment. So you've got a cost there. But the cost is also enhanced because you've got these long timelines for FERC approval of these licensing amendments, and time equals cost. So you can't see it from where you are, but you can see the blue line shooting up. What this is these are the non-capacity amendment applications per year, beginning in 2000, going to 2020. So what you have happening is this crazy escalation in the number of non-capacity amendments that are put before FERC. So they have, so this information here comes from FERC's e-library if you're curious about the math here. But the number of amendments has shot up significantly, and what this then does is it causes longer timelines for the approvals for these very simple amendments. So, I mean, we're not talking about major overhauls. Like a simple project, if you need to replace a power pole, you go back and you get in line for a license amendment. We've lost our way with this process, and the only thing that's impacted is it just keeps getting harder and harder to be a small hydro operator nowadays. So I think what we're trying to do here is kind of bring FERC back to some regulatory sanity, but keep the license amendment process and the procedures to what they're intended for, which is the substantial alterations of the project works plans. So I would just ask, I guess I would ask for an explanation from the chairman as to to why this particular amendment, which I think is just so matter of fact, matter of course, is problematic, and why we can't address it at this time.
I'm
and if
told-
we can't do that, then I would like real guarantee that we're going to be addressing
You
this
have my
in the next
guarantee,
one.
which you already do, and as a non-resident of Alaska, I'm as supportive as anyone could be, and if I was a resident of Alaska, I would not have a better advocate than you representing me. With all that being said, we're trying to fix, we know that the severe problems we have in hydro, and that's why we brought it in. I'm told by council that if we took this amendment, it would limit us being able to fix the things we've talked about and committed already, so it needs to be a total package when we fix all of this. That's what I've been told. It could cause us some problems there. So there's nobody with any other consideration in trying to get it all right. Hydro is a big part of this. It came late, that's all I can tell you, and we just haven't had time to run the traps. I don't think we have a problem with FERC. I don't think we have a problem with any of that. We just got to get the language right with them.
Well, Mr. Chairman, respectfully, I'm not saying that it's FERC's problem, but what we have done is we have complicated things so unnecessarily that now things come to FERC, and it's just routine stuff that they've got to sign off on, but there's no reason that they should have to sign off on these types of modifications in the first place. That's the issue. That's our problem. And we haven't addressed it. If this chart is any indication, we have complicated the FERC unnecessarily. We have complicated the activities of our small hydro operators. We are impeding opportunities on all ends. So I get what you're saying, but I also am afraid that, you know, we're going to wait for the perfect hydro bill.
What they're saying on this right here said it would basically, the amendment would greatly change FERC's current authority under the Federal Power Act for dam safety and monitoring, which is something that we have to work through and get the language correct, because you're trying to correct another problem and not endanger the oversight they have for the dam safeties. I agree with what you're trying to do there. I just want to make sure that we don't harm another part. And that's all I'm asking for there, is that we're committed to getting it done and getting it done right. So it's going to be in. I mean, it's a privilege that'll go to the floor with this in there once we get it worked out between now and by the time that we do take it to the floor.
I will just say, though, we're not changing FERC's authorities here at all. It's only giving them congressional direction here that they should follow their own process. They shouldn't require these license amendments for these types of really inconsequential changes. So I don't think that this is a situation where we are complicating further FERC. If you look to...
Maybe if I can ask, if
Go
I
ahead.
don't mind, Sam, can you give us how it changes FERC's authority, how this would change FERC's authority?
Well, the amendment does amend both Section 9A and Section 10B and 10C of the Federal Power Act. 9A is the requirement that in order to get a license from FERC, the applicant has to submit maps, plans,
Right.
specification, engineering details. And there's no limitation, and perhaps that's the problem, on the degree of those specifications and maps. But by inserting the word substantial, as the amendment does, that raises a question as to what substantial is. If you move a line on a map by an inch, for example, on an eminent domain transmission siting provision.
Sam, move your mic, if you will.
You could be making some very substantial changes. The moving the line is not substantial. The results on the ground would be. The 10B provision I mentioned, that is the protection of life, safety, and property provision of the Federal Power Act that gives the commission the ability to make sure that once a license has been issued, that the project remains safe. It also encompasses navigation and flood control, which is not in this committee's jurisdiction. That belongs to the Environment Committee. There are implications of changing the words in the Federal Power Act that have been there for 104 years on these issues of life, safety, and property and navigation. And I think what Senator Manchin is saying is that we want to be careful before we start changing those words and removing authority from the commission, that the commission can still protect the public health and safety and interests.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would never argue with Sam Fowler, except
he was here when they wrote that 104 years ago.
He was. But I will just note that it is FERC's own compliance handbook that shows the path, the process for the decision, and right in the center is whether or not there is substantial modification, and if it's not, then you move forward through the process. So this is at the very heart of their decision matrix in the licensing process. So we're not changing words around here. What we're doing again is we're not changing FERC's authority. We're giving them the direction that says, if this is not substantial, move forward. I interrupted the ranking member there.
But no, Senator, you have my commitment to address this issue before we move this bill out of the Senate. I would like to ask Pat to give us some explanation.
Yes,
as well.
I would respectfully disagree with my colleague here with respect to this amendment. The statute actually imposes on a licensee the obligation to keep the licensee's facilities safe, and these non-substantial changes in the project. I think the senator had an anecdote from one project about moving a pole. These are things that had traditionally, we understand, had traditionally been done without the need for a submission, and I think the senator pointed to the information from the e-library. So I think what, in our view, what the amendment does is really restore the normal practice that FERC had with respect to making a judgment about when an amendment would be required to be submitted, and would provide, as the senator has said, direction from the Congress, frankly, to go back to that earlier practice.
What I'm trying to do is legislate common sense here.
If I might, the problem that I see in the wording of the amendment is that twice I read the word notwithstanding any other provision of law, which my colleague, Mr. McCormick, is absolutely right. Under current law, FERC has all those authorities. But when you notwithstand them, you wipe them out. And the language of this amendment controls over what the commission has been able to do under existing authority. But I think what I'm hearing is that the problem is one of implementation, and maybe the FERC's predecessor, the Federal Power Commission, did nothing for 15 years other than focus on hydroelectric licensing and regulation. And then they were given responsibility over electric transmission, and then they were given responsibility over natural gas pipelines, and all of a sudden, you know, those are the areas that eat up the commission's time and attention. And as the chairman has indicated, by focusing the committee's attention further on the implementation of these hydroelectric authorities, perhaps we can address these issues without actually taking away necessary authority to protect life, safety, and property and navigation interests.
Mr. Chairman, I get it, I get it.
Killed on the time.
And I also, having been there, know that I can read votes going around. And what I'd rather have is a win on this, because it's just, again, to me, it's just so common sense. It just makes sense. And I think I've got the commitment from the chairman and the ranking. And hopefully from smart people on
We
staff.
agree. We just need to fix it, that's all.
I think it's pretty close to fixed.
Okay,
but-
we're going to get it better.
All right. I will withdraw my amendment.
Thank you so much.
It was offensive to me as a woman. Women make their own determinations as to whether or not they're going to have children or cats or dogs or how many kids they're going to have.
Do you think you might vote for Harris, Senator Murkowski? No? Okay. Thank you.
I think what the country would hope for, certainly what I'm hoping for in a campaign, is a discussion on the issues and the policies. There's plenty of room to debate the issues. You've got two campaigns that are presenting very, very different views on these issues. So let's talk about the issues. We don't need to talk about, we don't need to engage in name calling. We don't need to create inflammatory statements. Let's just talk about the issues.